I'm Dawn Wisher.
And I'm Katie Metz, and this is How to Teach College. Welcome back to How to Teach College. We're so excited to be back. Unfortunately, though, we are not in front of a live audience.
It's so sad.
I know. I actually am sad. It was really fun to be at the Falcon Conference. We were there in early November talking in front of a live audience just about, in general, how we teach college and kind of getting some feedback from people. I had a lot of fun there.
It was good. They brought energy into the room.
Some really good
but
questions.
It's just us again. So we have to bring the energy. So I've brought my coffee because that's how I bring energy.
I think I have water because I might have overhyped myself with coffee already this morning. Oops. So today we're continuing the conversation about how we learn. That was a theme that we were really deliberate about in the Falcon Conference. And so this is sort of like a transitional podcast to quickly debrief about Falcon and that live podcast. I was so excited that we were there. So thank you to everybody who showed up. Thank you for those of you who have subscribed since we told you that we have a podcast about how to teach college. Hello there. And then also why we're continuing to talk about how we learn. And I think the big premise of transitioning this how do we learn to a part two is that there's this misnomer that you can be an expert in your discipline, and that means you'll be a good teacher in the classroom, that I'm good at accounting, I'm good at learning about history or even talking about history, and that will translate into being a good teacher of history, psychology. You can put literally any of your subjects in there. But that does not equal expertise in pedagogy or teaching. And I just think that one of the themes that will continue post-holiday break or unofficial season 2, if you will, is that we need to really focus on how pedagogy and teaching skills facilitate our understanding of our discipline. We're here because of our discipline, but we also need to learn how to teach. Many of the best practitioners in our discipline are not cut out for the classroom. Hi, Dad. My dad who probably doesn't listen to this podcast, but he's an amazing human, a wonderful human, and one of the bases of my success in life and as a human. He's a fantastic tax partner in an accounting firm. He is the tax partner, and he would not only hate my job, I'm a tax professor, right, but he would not be cut out for that. He just doesn't know about teaching pedagogy. He doesn't care as much. So
right. So it's like you have to sort of have the personality or the love for it, but also be willing to learn it and to practice it. And so today specifically, we're going to talk about just debriefing, like Katie said, from that Falcon conference. I'd love to share a couple of things that I learned because that is how we learn. And then just reiterating again, this notion of understanding pedagogy, not just our discipline, but the importance of caring and making it something that we do continue to study. And then we will only touch on this because it will be something we'll talk about in future episodes, but also just trends and the future of pedagogy. So yes, I would love to share a couple of things that I learned. The 2 sessions that I was able to go to on the day where we got to do the live podcast in the morning, I was able to go to a couple sessions later in the day. And there was one that was titled, "You Don't Know What You Don't Know." And it made me think of the expert blind spot that you got to do, Katie. And I don't know that I've only listened to part of that one, so I get to go back and be a listener in that case. But this was more helping students realize, and us even helping understand who our students are. So Lisa Thompson teaches in psychology. And so this is based on psychology research that it's the people who are less experts that think they know more, and people who are actually experts don't believe they know as much. So I guess this is from psychology research, but the problem with that is that sometimes even our younger students can truly think they know it all and think they are awesome at whatever we're asking them to do because they don't know the full picture. So they can't really put themselves on a spectrum of kind of where they should be.
I noticed that specifically when I was in freshman level classes. So right now I'm in a position where I teach mostly seniors, but I know you teach mostly freshmen. Right. In my previous position, I was teaching a freshman. It doesn't matter big or small class. They come out of high school with a sense of self, what for better or for worse. And a lot of teaching freshmen is teaching them what they don't know so that they can learn more about what they should know, right?
Well, and one thing I found interesting, and so I found this interesting as a professor who does teach freshmen because they've just left high school, like you noted, but also as a mom. I mean, I have a toddler, but I'm already thinking about what is the landscape going to look like for Addison when she's in junior high and high school. And one thing that this professor talked about at this conference was how students are collaborating more and more and more. And so it does blur the lines of what's cheating and what's collaborating, which is pretty interesting because with Google Docs, just understanding that when they come to our classroom, they may already be primed to think that all of their work should be basically this like communal project. But she was also saying the danger in that. So I just thought that was kind of interesting from two parts to think about how the next generation really does work in community, but also the idea that they are working in community of non-experts. So if they're editing each other's papers, they're like, that is so good. And a lot of times they think like the more flowery language you use rather than concise wording, they think the bigger words is a better paper. So they're getting this feedback from their peers who are not the teacher. They're not experts in writing. And they're like, oh, that's amazing. So the danger there of, you're kind of crowdsourcing, but from people that are on your level.
Oh my gosh, this is so funny because the other day, this is like so random in a classroom the other day, and this is kind of a bad story, I'll be honest.
Those are the best ones.
90% of my stories are unkind or unfair to somebody, mostly me.
I like the drama.
So I caught a couple of students in class the other day looking at each other's computers while they were taking a quiz. So it was like the dumbest thing ever.
Right.
They're taking a quiz on their computer. It's in lockdown browser, so they're not supposed to get on the internet. They can't do it.
Right.
They're looking at each other's computers. And the only way, I was like mad. Why would you cheat in my class? It's stupid. And I didn't say anything.
You're not even doing it well.
Yeah. And that's the thing. You're not even doing it well. You're not even doing it in a situation that's like really that beneficial for you. But the thing I said, instead of I'm grabbing you for academic misconduct, it wasn't really provable, was, hello out there. Your friends aren't as smart as you think they are. Right? It's like you can look over there, but
they may have it wrong.
I just saw the friend on the other side of you submit the quiz, and he didn't do that great.
Right. I mean, don't look at that one.
So I actually remind my students, like, collaborate, but don't rely on your friends to be that super smart. They might be. You never know. But that can't be like the relying factor. It was just like such a weird thing I had to say.
Well, so I think there's a shift, and maybe this could be a future podcast that we could talk about because it does seem like there's a shift, and we are asking for collaborating. But what is that line and understanding kind of where they're coming from high school? So I just thought all of that was really interesting. There was more takeaways from that.
Yeah.
But the other one that I was able to go to was called Cultivating Trust with project groups. And guess what? They did some improv. We all know that's my love.
That's your love.
But it was interesting just because, and we've talked about teams. We'll talk more about teams. But basically they understood that you're kind of just meeting these new people and expected to just work with them and sort of just automatically have this culture. And so they just did some fun things with these teams. One example, this sounds silly, but actually it was kind of fun because they had us do it, is that they gave everybody, it was like a sticker. And so some people had dogs, some people had cats. And to find your group members, you had to make the noise of said animal.
Oh, weird.
I know. And there were people that wouldn't do it. Sorry, and you know me. I mean, you can see the yin and yang, right, of Katie and I here.
So you did it, right?
Oh, and I did it, on a level 110. I was like, let me be the dog, right?
I would have stood in a corner and cried.
And there were those of you that did. And it was fine because we found each other and we were like, okay, we know that I am me and I will do what I'm going to do. And thank God that there's you because we have to have that balance. So yeah, that one was kind of funny. But yeah, and I can't remember all of the others that we did, but it was pretty interesting. I feel like I don't like icebreaker. If you say icebreaker, yes. I suddenly am very opposed. But when you say it's improv, suddenly I'm like, oh, yes, let's do it.
So framing a little bit. Cultivating trust by framing. That's really interesting. I feel like...
But just having them do something to break down those barriers early on.
Yes.
And the research that they looked at and that what they had done just, qualitatively in their classes was that the teams where they gave them something to do to build a bond early on, they did perform better.
That's fantastic. Yeah. And this is actually really timely that we learned about this at Falcon because our next episode is going to be about how we assess teams. Mm-hmm. So once we form them, how we get there. Man, that was really awesome. That sounds like
So those were a couple takeaways. I thought, I love going to these sessions. I know that we said it in part 1, but just this notion of you may go in and see the title and think you're going to get something specific out of it, and you may not. And I know you said this, so I want to reiterate it. is not to, have that internal eye roll or to automatically close and go to another session or leave the room or even get on a laptop and start working, but to think, okay, but what did I get out of this?
Right.
It wasn't what I thought, but can I take something else away? Or, in that first 30 seconds, hey, at least I have this idea and maybe I draft a new project because something was sparked.
Well, we got a question offline after the episode that we taped was over at Falcon. And the question was effectively, what do we do as a podcast team to ensure that our podcast is multidisciplinary?
Yes.
And that's exactly the type of thing that we're talking about. Is I very rarely talk specifically about what I teach.
Right.
And as listeners, what both of us teach very broadly and kind of where our backgrounds came from, but that you can take an idea. So I guess to rephrase, don't write something off because you don't see it as directly relating to your discipline.
Yes.
And in that context, that sort of expertise in our discipline does not equal expertise in teaching. I think one of the reasons that people are so quick to write off things like, well, that you didn't mention, I'm a history professor and you didn't mention history in your podcast, is that it's very, very easy to write that sort of thing off and not really have the motivation. And I get it. I've been there so many times to translate it into, but how could this actually help me? Yeah, I don't teach that exact same class. I actually don't even teach anything super close to this, but how might I be able to take a fundamental component of it and make it mine? I didn't think there was a lot on this, by the way. This whole expertise in our discipline does not equal expertise in teaching. I did a quick Google search. I know that this is true, but I wanted to see what the internet, what the Google machine thought about it. Man, there's a lot of information out there about this. And a lot of it is studies about how universities have done a better job facilitating teaching excellence in discipline-specific contexts. One of the articles I read actually literally had that title, Facilitating Teaching Excellence in Discipline-Specific Contexts. And this was in the Faculty Focus Higher Ed Teaching and Learning journal. And it was a 2008 article, but it had a lot of really interesting feedback because this team did some research with its own faculty members and started to gather basically some resources about what their faculty members needed. So a lot of this revolved around custom developed training programs specific to a discipline. And I just want to briefly touch on this particular topic because we'll go more into the actual trends and fundamentals later on. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I thought was really interesting is that this is actually becoming a trend. We're seeing this in our own Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning, CITL, here at IU in Bloomington, where you'll start to see these workshops pop up that are suddenly STEM focused or suddenly communication focused or qualitative focused. So even if we're not talking about a situation where it's like, hey, people who are interested in teaching marketing, come to this place. Or hey, those of you who are in international studies or brain psychology, come to this workshop. We're at least starting to think about discipline-specific pedagogy in buckets rather than just, hey, everybody, come here. And I think that's one of the frustrations sometimes that people have is that they don't feel like they're going to get much out of it because it's not directly related to their discipline. So I'm seeing that trend a little bit.
No, that's good.
More. We also have both found that we learn about pedagogy in our own disciplines from direct sources like conferences or kind of organic sessions. So
yeah, well, actually, really quickly before we transition to that, I'm actually going to an NTT workshop today that CITL and Facet put on together. And I know when I've gone to those, something that's been interesting, and again, I mean, we're always kind of thinking about future podcast ideas to chat with each other and chat with all of you about. But one that was interesting was they changed the title, but this was the secret for a real title. It was the notion of hand holding or tough love.
Right.
And it seemed like it was even some of the women in the room that maybe set more boundaries. So maybe realizing we are going to maybe have a stop time to email because we have decided that we want to, have just our self-care time, or maybe that is time for the toddler, right? But it's something where we were able to set the boundaries. Or some people even realize, I don't need to set these boundaries, but I'm aware of other people that maybe they're a single mom. And so I want to sort of set this culture to help them to basically say, no, I'm not always available to you. So even just hearing other women that might be teaching over in math or in science, but hearing, and not just the women, there were men in the room, but how they show their students that they are approachable, but still they're able to set boundaries. So even things like that, just kind of classroom practices, it doesn't matter what discipline you're in, we're all sort of in this together. And what are student expectations? How do we meet them but still have boundaries?
Right.
So even things like that can come up in these workshops or these conferences.
And that's really true. We're getting to finals. Many of you are actually doing finals next week, and IU is going a week late. We started a week later than many people out there. And so I'm having students who are really starting to panic. And I get it. Man, do I get it. But their context for panic is different from mine in that I literally had a student yesterday ask me if I could meet this weekend to go over his grade and talk about some things. And man, am I happy to meet with him. But so much time. Not on the weekend. No. Because kind of getting your students to think, and man, is this an episode that we could just talk about for hours. Yeah. But getting students to think about the discipline itself, the context of this is my career.
Right.
I know this is your life. You're in college right now, but this is my career. And so.
And it will be your career soon. Yeah. You're not going to be asking your boss or a client to meet on the weekend. Right.
Compartmentalizing a little bit. And part of our job, I guess my point in saying that is teaching our students also to compartmentalize a little bit and think about their own time management in the context of that.
And I'd even say that's how we learn, kind of as we're learning these things, we're sharing with them.
It's absolutely how we learn, that we're sharing with them.
But yeah, I can definitely talk, and I know we're probably starting to get to be wrapping up, but one of the conferences that I often go to is called ABC, the Association of Business Communicators. And something that they do that I know I've seen at other conferences that's helpful, they call them lightning rounds or even speed dating rounds, quick idea sessions. And sometimes they'll have you in a round table where you just get like a minute on the clock to quickly go through. One of them's my favorite assignment.
Yes, my favorite assignment.
Or I know they've done ones that are specific to maybe diversity and inclusion. Mm-hmm. And people only get a minute, which isn't a long time. I'm long-winded. I know that's hard to believe for anybody listening. But you get that minute, and so it forces you to be succinct. And that gives the opportunity for the people in the room to hear a number of ideas and sort of just, okay, what sticks that I can use, and what doesn't, that's okay.
It doesn't have to be like a big thing either. Right. I found that my best conference ideas have come from literally somebody doing a 30-second idea. And if it, again, I cannot emphasize enough for those of you listening who are thinking about this in the context of your own discipline, don't write it off just because it doesn't directly relate to you. Pick something out and go, how can I translate this into something that might work in my own classroom? It doesn't even have to be the same subject. I mean, it's nice if it's a similar subject, but I don't really teach it that way, or I teach undergraduate students versus graduate students. But really start to think about how you can take one quick idea and make it yours, that sort of creativity in the classroom. I know that my department kind of does this in a micro level, where we have these things called food for thought sessions. My colleague Anita has been super amazing at facilitating these for the department, where we have roughly one a month. We gather together on a Friday morning and sit down, and we take turns basically talking about a skill that we think other people in the room might know. It's usually a small group, like 10 or fewer colleagues, but we learn so much in that room, and usually it involves some sort of follow-up. Oh, hey, I really liked that you did that. Or, oh, it seems like that idea didn't quite translate to what I was looking for, but maybe you could help me reframe it. So any opportunity you have to just get quick thoughts from people, whether it's in your own department or your discipline or even across campus. Yeah. I think that's really helpful. That's how I learn most effectively.
For people who are looking for service opportunity or leadership opportunity, if you're involved in an organization where you're putting on a conference or even a mini conference, hey, here's an idea for you. Do some quick sessions. You don't have to have people present for a full hour. Tell people we want to hear your ideas, and we're going to give you a minute or 5. And then exactly what you just said, if you're within your department and you feel like, hey, we could really be learning from one another. I know today, I can't make it, unfortunately, but we use Canvas here as our learning platform.
Our course management platform.
Thank you. Yes. And so they're doing a Fancify Canvas. Ooh. And I'm bummed to miss it, but basically helping people see here's a way to make it look better, or maybe, we sort of create it as the professor, but what does the student see it? What would be a better way for them to interact with it? So someone took the lead and said, hey, let's do this. And so always looking for those opportunities when you want to learn, hey, open that up to other people or take the role to make it happen.
And that's a great point. That is definitely a leadership opportunity. I know Hannah's had a lot of success putting that into our department, and I just think it's so helpful. It's like a dedicated time for me to sit down. I've actually facilitated a couple of the sessions. It's really fun to be able to sit down and discuss some of the cool things you're doing and just to learn about what other people are doing on campus. I guess the final thought today would be just to put a little bit of brainstorming into all of your ears out here and talking briefly about the future of pedagogy. So like kind of what's coming up. This sets us up to talk about these more specifically later on. But for those of you who are starting to think about planning for the spring semester, I just wanted to talk a little bit about what we can think about pedagogy really meaning in a college classroom. So Georgia Tech did a report in February of 2016. It was a really big report discovering the drivers of change in higher education. It was one of those provost-appointed projects, and one of the sections in there was called The Future of Pedagogy Discovery. I thought this was a really impactful thing that Georgia Tech did, and the report obviously is in the context of Georgia Tech, a very predominantly engineering school, but they had 4 fundamental components of this Future of Pedagogical Discovery report that I thought were really helpful in what we're thinking about pedagogy being in the future. So they talked about this in terms of educational technologies and how we can continue to work with the development of them while not making our class too techy.
Yeah.
Including whole human development. And I think this was an engineering way of saying interpersonal skills.
Yeah.
So kind of thinking about those, what we hate to call, but it's soft skills. Yeah, soft skills. Conceptual frameworks relating the means to the ends. We've talked about this a lot on this podcast. So making sure that we're showing our classrooms or discipline as a whole system rather than little micro pieces that don't have anything to do with each other throughout the semester. And then the fourth one is a culture of educational innovation, which is rewarding faculty and students for developing pedagogical and learning skills. And I thought that these 4 were just interesting and cool. And so
it makes it exciting too to be in this profession.
Oh my gosh, I know. I was actually so jazzed to see this report and thinking, as we're thinking about how to teach college, that's why we're all here, of course. But what we are really doing and what we're seeing other universities doing to drive that. So, Dawn, we've done so much today.
We have. Are you going to include that in the notes? So that
I'll include the faculty focus in the Georgia Tech article. I think it was really interesting.
That sounds good. I will read those because that is how we learn, and this is how we teach college.